Welcome to another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by Speedstream. I'm Lynn Woolley. Today we're going to talk to John Griffing of WorldNet Daily. John is an investigative reporter. He's written extensively about a curriculum program called CSCOPE. We're going to find out from John exactly what it is and why we don't want it in our schools. John, welcome.
Lynn, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Tell us a little bit about what CSCOPE is.
Well, Lynn, CSCOPE was billed as a curriculum management tool to teachers and school districts who initially bought into the concept. It's not that at all. It's an actual curriculum, complete with ideologically driven content designed to brainwash our school children, and it's very dangerous.
Tell us a little bit about what the initial objections were to CSCOPE.
CSCOPE had pro-Islam biased religion studies material. It portrayed Republicans as anti-freedom, big business, portrayed Democrats as a party worth supporting. Keep in mind, these are elementary school kids, these are middle school kids. What relevance does this have? It portrayed communism as a successful economic system and something that should be embraced. We're in the 21st century now. These are the types of things that raised red flags, no pun intended, early in the process, and caused parents and teachers and other action groups to get involved in it.
I've heard you mention the comparison that CSCOPE made on various economic ways of running a country with capitalism where and communism where?
Capitalism at the very bottom.
At the bottom.
Of a ladder, mind you, Lynn. So you have a picture, if you will, a step ladder up to communism with capitalism at the very bottom. This is imagery that is clearly intended to plant notions that do not belong in the heads of young Texans.
So the Texas legislature makes CSCOPE illegal to be in our schools, and what does it then do as a reaction?
Well, a series of events have now happened. At first, we succeeded in getting CSCOPE and its parent nonprofit, which was illegal and dissolved, to remove the lessons from the classroom. These are bureaucrats who are weary of lawsuits being threatened, weary of state-level subpoenas, weary of the possibilities of audits. That really, I think, propelled us to a place where we could have a genuine conversation about whether or not these deficient curriculum tools belonged in our classrooms. So the lessons were removed. After that happened, we had some defiant school districts who said, we're going to keep using them anyway. And we had the TEA commissioner, God bless him, somehow decide independently, unilaterally, that CSCOPE lessons were now public domain and could be used by anyone should they so choose. So we've essentially created a two-headed monster now, and CSCOPE has reinvented itself, rebranded, renamed, and they're still in classrooms, loud and strong, and we still have a lot to do with it.
It's similar to what Acorn did when it rebranded itself. All right. Of the school districts in Texas, which are, by the way, suing the taxpayers right now over funding, how many used CSCOPE in the past that were told to not do it by law, but have gone back to doing it? What percentage?
Well, you know what, that's hard to say because, again, there's no record keeping. There's no accounting. We know that a few superintendents have come out on record publicly and said, we're going to keep using this and there's nothing, Texas citizens, that you can do to stop us. But apart from that, we could have any number and any size school district still utilizing this deficient, toxic, and poisonous content. So it's definitely alarming, and there needs to be a real housekeeping. And frankly, Lynn, the only way we can do that with something as problematic and messy as CSCOPE that was in 80% of our schools is to just get rid of it completely.
All right, we've just had an election. We're about to have a runoff election, and we'll soon have a new legislature. And some people think it may actually be more conservative than the prior legislature. Is there something that this new legislature can do to put a stake in the heart of CSCOPE forever?
Yes, Lynn, glad you mentioned that. Defund the educational service centers. These are dysfunctional, antiquated entities that have no business in the 21st century educational system in Texas, and they're costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And frankly, we can't really see how they're spending it in many cases. We know that at least $12 million was spent on an independent contractor in New York State to help design CSCOPE, for example, and this was done without contracts. That means that $12 million at least of our taxpayer dollars were spent by educational service centers on some guy in his house in New York without proper agreements in place. That's the type of thing that the ESCs do very well. And when it comes to education, Lynn, and when it comes to designing lesson content of the variety necessary to propel our students forward into the future, the ESCs fail miserably. That belongs in the hands of teachers, belongs in the hands of schools.
Well, we send our kids off to school in the morning, and some of the things that some of us would like to see them taught, things like character, things like personal finances, what the stock market is, what compound interest is, a little bit about civics and how we elect our people. Does CSCOPE contain any of these things?
CSCOPE would say yes, but then they wouldn't show you where and how and in what way. So oftentimes parents have had innumerable difficulties up until the point of being charged exorbitant sums to see what their kids are learning. That's been challenged in court. But basically you have a situation where CSCOPE is largely this invisible entity, and only our kids get exposed to it. And we have very little say in that process. So from what I've seen, Lynn, everything that they have included on civics has been tilted against the United States.
All right, but you talk about it being invisible, and a parent, even if it's a single parent household or a household where the parents are not involved with the children, in many cases those kids are sent off to school and they're depending on the school to do the right thing.
Sure.
Parents just don't know what their kids are being taught, do they?
Parents don't want to know in many cases, and who can blame them? As this is pretty horrible stuff when you see what types of things. Designing a flag for a socialist country, students are told, imagine that you're in a socialist country. Okay, why are we imagining these things? When that's the type of stuff that's going on, who can blame parents for wanting to stick their head in the sand? Nonetheless, we have to stop that, and we have to go ahead and start facing reality. The reality is we have some very determined ideologues on the other side of the political spectrum who are trying to change Texas forever, and they're trying to do it with our kids.
How much power do school boards have about a program such as this, and how much do school boards know?
No more than parents give them. School boards are signing away their authority to CSCOPE and other third-party entities every time they vote for third-party curriculum management systems. But parents are still the most important part of that process, and it's still accountable to parents. And when parents go into, for example, Lumberton ISD, and pound their fists and make their voices heard, good things happen.
All right, well, one prediction to end the interview, and that is, will we still have CSCOPE or whatever it has been rebranded at the end of the next legislative session?
That depends on whether or not the educational service centers are abolished. No amount of restructuring will fix this
All right,
problem.
and Dan Patrick versus David Dewhurst for Lieutenant Governor, does that matter in this case?
It does, and I'll tell you why. My experience with the CSCOPE issue over the last legislative session, I haven't seen Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst appear very often on this issue. In fact, it was only Monday morning quarterbacking after it became an election concern that I heard Dewhurst comment at all. So irrespective of my personal views on either candidate, I would say that actions speak very loud, and the sudden interest of David Dewhurst in CSCOPE doesn't really speak to sincerity, Lynn.
Well, thank you very much. John Griffing with WorldNet Daily. You can read his columns at WND.com. This has been Texas Insider Television. Remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Lynn Woolley. We'll see you next time.